When it comes to gifting, everyone on your list deserves something special. Luckily, Marshall's buyers travel far and wide, hustling for great deals and amazing gifts, so you don't have to. That means your mom gets that cashmere sweater, your best friend, that Italian leather bag. Your coworkers unwrap their favorite beauty brands, and your nephews, the coolest new toys. Go ahead, at prices this good, you can grab something for yourself too. Marshalls, we get the deals, you gift the good stuff. Shop now at marshalls.com or find a store near you.
If you've been told you need a new furnace or have a bad heat exchanger, call Sears Heating and Cooling for a free second opinion. You'd be stunned at how often we run these calls and nothing is wrong. Sears Heating and Cooling, honest advice, fair pricing, and locally owned for almost 8 decades. SearsHeatingCooling.com.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 587, Operation Husky could have been Huskier. Last time, Operation Corkscrew had cleared out the smaller islands between Tunisia and Sicily, and yet it had been carried out in such a way as to still not point directly to Sicily. Hitler believed the Allies would strike next at the Balkans to disrupt his Romanian oil and other raw materials in the region, whereas Italian and German high commands believed that Sardinia, Sicily, Crete, and Greece were equally fair game. With no consensus, the Axis dispersed their resources further in an attempt to defend everywhere, which, as the saying goes, leads to defending nowhere. And then came Operation Mincemeat. But first, Mincemeat was only a part of the larger Operation Barclay, the Allied deception that would make the enemy look anywhere but Sicily. The Allies created fake troop movements, corresponding radio traffic. They recruited Greek interpreters on a large scale and acquired, rather haphazardly, as many Greek maps as they could. All this pointed to the non-existent 12th Army in the Eastern Mediterranean, with 12 equally fake divisions. This fed into Hitler's fears. And then there was Mincemeat, one of the greatest sleight of hands ever executed. As this has been covered in detail in episode 538, the basics here will suffice. A dead man was put into a British officer's uniform. A briefcase was attached to the man, and inside the briefcase were phony documents to General Sir Harold Alexander laying out the plan of Operation Husky, that is, the coming Allied attack on Greece, to be carried out by General Sir Henry Maitland Wilson's forces in Egypt, while Alexander's forces attacked Sardinia in Operation Brimstone. A submarine released the body off of Spain's coast on April 30th, 1943. The body washed ashore, was found, and copies of the man's papers ended up in Berlin, which dovetailed perfectly, again, with Hitler's inner fear. So by July 1943, the German forces in the Balkans went from 8 to 18 divisions. However, the Commando Supremo believed, giving into his fear, much as Hitler had, that Sardinia was the most likely next target. Specifically, that Sardinia, once captured, would be used by the Allies to either land troops in southern France or, worse, northern Italy, to cut off Mussolini's empire from German help. But it was the Commander South Kesselring and General Alfred Guzzoni, commander of the Axis forces on the island, who worried most over Sicily, thus affecting their point of view, like the others, except they were right. So without checking with Berlin, 2 more German divisions were sent to the island, and one of those was the Panzer Division Hermann Goering. Remember that for later. The Hermann Goering Division had fought in Tunisia recently, but between February and March had been taken out piecemeal. Not that all of the division was removed. Those still there when the Axis forces surrendered were captured, and by then some 400 of its soldiers had been killed in action. And of those captured, they constituted the majority of the division's veterans. But where to place these 2 divisions created more trouble than expected. Guzzoni wanted them placed in the southeast, as this was the most likely spot of an Allied landing. but Kesselring wanted them to protect the island's western ports, i.e. Palermo and Trapani, and as he controlled the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, it went to the west. But troop placement on Sicily was not the overriding problem for the Axis in mid-1943. No, it was Rome's intention, or not, to remain in the Berlin-Rome axis. By the summer of 1943, rumors swirled about what King Victor Emmanuel III was going to do vis-a-vis Mussolini. German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop was only one of the many high Nazi officials that was keeping a close eye on the king. Another was the German General Staff, which, per Hitler, came up with two contingency plans, Operations Alaric and Constantine. Alaric, named after the sack of Rome by Goth invaders in 410 AD, would be led by Rommel, and it called for the rapid entry into Italy of 4 German divisions with more to follow. Operation Constantine, on the other hand, was to disarm Italian forces in the Balkans if Italy switched sides, but more on that later. On June 21st, 1943, Italy made its move. Rome sent a list to Berlin of weapons it would need to fend off the Allies. Attached to the list was a numbered limit of how many German divisions could enter Italy, but Berlin saw right through this. The overall Italian request was a bridge too far, purposefully. Berlin would turn it down, and voila, Rome would have its excuse to leave the war and leave Germany, as it could claim it did not have the means to defend itself. Of course, Germany had to do something, but could at least take some relief in the plans that they had already made to take over Italy, should it come to that. But as bad as Axis relations were, and were worsening, the Allied plan to invade Sicily was anything but smooth, as everyone had their own agenda, i.e. the air and naval commanders, and of course, General Patton and General Monty. One of the many things that came from the Casablanca Conference was Force 141 headquarters, which would plan Operation Husky. Its first draft came out on March 15th, but the Allied leaders did not exactly have time for that, as they were busy in Tunisia. But when time was more free and senior officers, British and American, started looking over Force 141's work, they disagreed on the two most important aspects of the invasion plan: the seizure of particular airfields and port cities. Air Marshal Tedder and his staff stressed that airfields on Sicily needed to be seized ASAP, justifying this with Malta was already stressed to the breaking point in servicing fighters, and Sicily was on the operational edge of Malta-based fighters, which was all true enough. But the naval planners stressed that the capture of ports was needed to come first, as in, once the troops landed, if they did not have enough of, everything, what was the point? The best port on Sicily was Messina, but it was too close to the Italian mainland and literally beyond the range of Malta-based fighters. The next best port was Palermo on the northwestern coast, and then came Catania and Syracuse on Sicily's east coast. They were smaller, but could handle about 1,000 tons of cargo each day. The planners of Husky, knowing most of this, tried to appease the airmen and naval officers simultaneously with sequential landings. The British Eastern Task Force would execute 4 separate landings on D-Day, all targeting airfields or smaller ports. Then, on D+3, the main landing would happen near Catania in the middle of the East Coast. As for the Americans, they would land troops on D+2 to capture the airfields at Sciacca and Castelvetrano on the island's southwest border, and on D+5, land troops on either side of Palermo, much as they had did with the initial landings of Torch. But Supreme Commander Eisenhower took one look at this and had issues. Hey everyone, Ray here. Let me make your life a little easier and introduce to you your next binge-worthy podcast. In the fall of 1620, a battered merchant ship called the Mayflower set sail across the Atlantic. It carried 102 men, women, and children, risking it all to start again in the new world. Every week on American History Tellers, host Lindsey Graham takes you through the moments that shaped America. In our latest season, we explore the untold story of the Pilgrims, one that goes far beyond the familiar tale of the first Thanksgiving. After landing at Cape Cod, the Pilgrims forged an unlikely alliance with the Wampanoag people. They helped survive the most brutal winter they had ever known, laying the foundation for a powerful national myth. But behind the story lies another, one of conflict, betrayal, and brutal violence against the very people who helped them survive. Follow American History Tellers on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes of American History Tellers, The Mayflower, early and ad-free right now on Wondery Plus. Eisenhower did not like the dispersal of troops. He countered with Allied troops should be disembarked in the southeast. But the planners countered with, we need the port of Palermo in the northwest, which is when Monty got involved. Being a self-promoter, as most generals are, he suggested that one of the American divisions should land just left of his landings in the southeast to cover his left flank. That was it. That was the extent of his suggestion. Nothing about airfields or ports or American needs. The discussions continued. A month later, in April, as seen, there was a growing anxiety about Axis air power, so the focus switched back to capturing airfields as a priority. So, putting in his 2 cents, British Corps Commander Lieutenant General Oliver Leese said the southeast corner was best as there were airfields nearby as well as the ports of Syracuse, Augusta, and Catania. But overall, the plan of attack was not advancing. Thus, Eisenhower called for another conference on May 2nd. Yet this was not just another meeting. Clarity was needed. But more than that, Ike was trying to pull his ass out of the fire and had placed said behind there all by himself. When he heard through Ultra that 2 more German divisions were being placed in Sicily, perhaps from all the planning discussions that were going nowhere, Ike was losing his enthusiasm for Husky. So on March 20th, he wrote to the combined chiefs, if substantial German ground troops should be placed in the region, the chances of success become practically nil, and the project should be abandoned. Then Ike repeated this on April 7th. To wit, Churchill impersonated an atomic bomb, exploding all over the place, saying if the presence of 2 German divisions is held to be decisive against any operation, to the 1 million men now in North Africa, it is difficult to see how the war can be carried on. It is perfectly clear that the operation must either be entrusted to someone who believes them or abandoned. What Stalin would think of this when he has 185 German divisions on his front, I cannot imagine. But when the meeting started that May 2nd, it was nothing more than the Monty show. Basically, he presented his plan of attack on focusing resources, i.e. the Americans, who were to forget about Palermo and simply guard his left flank. And due to the weather, Alexander nor Patton could attend this meeting. Then, as was his wont, Monty ambushed Bedell Smith, Ike's chief of staff, in the men's bathroom and persuaded the American to vote for his plan. It was approved, and Patton, according to General Bradley, kept his mouth shut, even though the 7th U.S. Army now had no major objective of its own. Not that the nitpicking and drama stopped there. Soon after the meeting, Ike wrote to General Marshall, saying, Montgomery is unquestionably able, but very conceited. For your most secret and confidential information, he is so proud of his successes to date that he will never willingly make a single move until he is absolutely certain of success. In other words, until he has concentrated enough resources so that anybody could practically guarantee the outcome. Fortunately, Alexander will never let him forget for 1 second who is the boss. But continuing this spillage of tea, Deputy Commander Admiral Cunningham wrote to the First Sea Lord, "Alexander appears quite unable to keep him, Monty, in order." And Ike also told Marshall that Alexander was afraid of Monty. Yet, on a personal note, this may come down to nothing more than Alexander's not screaming style of leadership. And as touching Alexander, it was General Omar Bradley who would later write, in part, Alexander had ceded this leading role to Monty because of his lingering distrust of the American GI. But at least now, Husky had the main parts worked out. A few days later, British VIPs traveled to Washington for the Trident Conference. Starting on May 12th, Churchill came in with his half of the combined chiefs and presented all sorts of daring attack plans, even one on the Italian mainland, ending with, "This will guarantee the fall of Mussolini." But FDR and Marshall and all the other Americans were set against this. To them, this was just another peripheral operation, taking men and material away from Operation Roundup, the invasion of northwest France. Besides, the American point of view was that taking Sicily, threatening southern Italy while bombing the hell out of the country, would on its own make Mussolini step down or be taken down. Churchill pretended to relent, giving up on the Italian mainland invasion, and agreed to commit to Operation Roundup for May 1st, 1944. But if the Prime Minister was expecting something in return, he was disappointed. Marshall would still not promise anything beyond Sicily in this theater. And having made his promise, Churchill next moved to undo his promise. Taking General Marshall to Algiers, the two men met with the likes of Ike, Alan Brooke, Alexander Cunningham, Tedder, and Bedell Smith. And during one Churchillian speech, flowing with descriptive words, he carried the other men's imagination with him. But not all. His peroration was the capture of Rome and its impact in history and on this war. Ike was in. Had the Prime Minister been a vacuum cleaner salesman, Ike would have purchased the entire package. But Marshall stayed aloof. His focus was still on a direct strike at the enemy in northwest France. Monty arrived back from home during the second half of these meetings and was his blustery self. Marshall was also not swayed by his confident delivery and swagger, which, to a degree, opened up the Chief of Staff General Alan Brooke's eyes, who would write, "It is most distressing that the Americans do not like him, Monty, and it will always be a difficult matter to have him fighting in close proximity to them." Thus, with no promise of anything after Sicily, Operation Husky could move forward. The plan, in its final stage, would see landings in the southeast corner, but then rapid thrusts were to be made to capture airfields, and then a strike at the ports of Augusta and Catania. Soon, ships loaded with infantry, tanks, and guns would move out. But after all was said and done, with Patton having a surprise for Monty, seems behind his closed mouth was a brain that was considering his own options, many would consider Husky a mistake, or rather too small of an operation. With all the deceptions put on by the Allies, the defenses around Calabria, on Italy's toe, were dangerously undermanned.
If you're the purchasing manager at a manufacturing plant, you know having a trusted partner makes all the difference. That's why, hands down, you count on Grainger for auto reordering. With on-time restocks, your team will have the cut-resistant gloves they need at the start of their shift. And you can end your day knowing they've got safety well in hand. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Soon after Husky, Marshall would call the operation a mistake. But he wasn't the only one. General Heinrich von Wittenhoff, commander of the German 10th Army in southern Italy, would say, "It is incomprehensible that the Allies did not seize the Strait of Messina, either at the same time as the landing in Sicily or in the course of the initial actions." Kesselring would take it further. writing, "A secondary landing on Calabria would have turned the landing in Sicily into an annihilating victory for the Allies." But it was General Omar Bradley who laid the what might have been at Ike's feet. He would write after the war, "Much of the blame for the mistake could be attributed to the unresolved conflicting views of the combined chiefs, the inevitable compromises of coalition warfare. But Ike must also share a large part of the blame. Though he had been kicked upstairs to chairman of the board, he was nonetheless, in name and fact, the commander-in-chief for the operation. Inasmuch as his 3 deputies were absorbed in the Tunisia fighting, it seems to me it was all the more important that Ike give the Sicily operation his utmost care and attention. He was the logical man to conceive the operation as a whole, impose his imprint, see it through, and accept responsibility for the consequences. But Ike did not rise to the challenge. Perhaps not, but he would learn, as they all would. Besides, for all of the cross purposes betwixt the Allies, that was a parade of unity compared to the Axis forces about to defend their home territory. Greetings, everybody, from Central Virginia. So we have this off and running, and I found this awesome bio on Bradley, so I'm using that a lot. Wow, he did not pull any punches after the war. Considering that Ike would go on to be president, it's pretty impressive. Next time, it's around here somewhere. Next time I'll tell you what it is. Sorry about that. So I'd like to thank Joseph Whitfield from Fayetteville, North Carolina, who bought a Churchill mug. I don't know if it's a Christmas gift or something that's for him, but either way, Joseph, thank you very much. As far as those who have donated, I would like to thank Stephen Whitby. Thank you very much, Stephen. Kevin Merrick. Thank you, KM. And Daniel Flanagan, who wrote a nice message. He is from Portsmouth, England. So thank you very much, Daniel. I will keep going. I appreciate it very much. And again, I have to mention my newest, latest, and greatest executive producer, Andrew Grossman from Astoria, New York. So you can find it all on the website if you want to donate. Be a producer, an executive producer. If you're an executive producer, I'm going to say your name for a year. So if you have an ego anywhere near as big as mine, you're going to want to consider that. But the regular producer just gets one mention and gets their name in the show notes. So you will live forever through the show notes. So anyways, so there's that. So just check out the shop page on the website. And yeah, so next week I will see you with the actual Operation Husky.